Hello, welcome everyone. We'll wait just a moment to let everyone get situated and get into the meeting. And then I'll go over a few of the little housekeeping things before we get started. Looks like we still have people joining us. I think we have quite a large crowd today. Everyone's excited about garden design. All right. Okay, it looks like most people have joined us. So just a few things. You'll notice you probably had to accept an agreement that said that this meeting is being recorded. So if you didn't want to appear, you can go ahead and turn off your camera. You will be muted for this meeting. However, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and the presenter will get to those. Helen will go over, we'll let you know when you can, when we'll be answering those, but you can put them at any time in the chat. So again, this program is being recorded and you don't have an option to unmute yourself, so you will have to put any questions you have in the chat. So thank you so much for joining us today on this garden design program. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Helen Dulac with the Dallas Environmental Quality Services Department. And she's going to give a little introduction and introduce our speaker. All right, thank you, Helen.
All right, thank you, Vanessa. I am super excited to be here today. I'm going to do a really quick presentation just to let you know a little bit about the series that we have today, and then we're going to go right into our garden design presentation. So my name is Helen Dulac. I work for the City of Dallas in environmental quality and sustainability, and we are beyond excited to be partnering with the Dallas Public Library Seed Library on this series called Grow With Us every Monday at noon. All right, let's see here. There. So just to give you a little bit of history about environmental quality and sustainability, because you've probably never heard of us, we were formed back in 2004, but we were called the Office of Environmental Quality. We worked really hard for 4 years to help Dallas become the first city in the United States to achieve a special environmental certification called ISO 14001. This is an international certification that a lot of large corporations and manufacturers get. We were the first municipality to do this, and this is significant because this is Dallas, Texas we're talking about, not a city in California, not a city in Colorado, not our neighbor down south, Austin, but it was Dallas that achieved this first. And we still hold this certification even today. So let's fast forward 10 years where a lot of changes happened to this department. There was a restructuring in the city, and OEQ absorbed some other environmental operations and programs, expanded, doubled in size, and to reflect that change, we changed our name. And that's when we became Environmental Quality and Sustainability, or DEQS. Also that year, with that merger, we created a combined outreach and engagement team that I'm a proud member of. The following year, Mayor Johnson created an Environment and Sustainability Committee of City Council. They meet the first Monday of every month, and those meetings are live streamed. And it's a great way to keep your finger on the green pulse of the city because you can learn a lot about new programs and pilots that are going on that are all geared towards improving the environment. Now, if you have heard of my department, it's probably because on May 27th of 2020, we were really excited when the Dallas City Council adopted our Comprehensive Environmental and Climate Action Plan, known as CCAP. It is historic because we're one of the few inland cities in the country that has a climate plan. So we do recognize climate change, we believe in it, and we're doing things to mitigate it. This plan is our roadmap for the next 30 years on how we're going to deliver services, improve the quality of life, and combat climate change at the same time. You can see all 250 pages of it at dallasclimateaction.com. And also, as we move forward doing different activities, even presentations like today's are all part of the CCAP plan. So I mentioned that we had a restructuring a couple of years ago. So what you see in green are the groups that joined us. And I'm going to talk about one of those just briefly, and that is stormwater management. So stormwater is anytime we have rain, like you probably experienced last night or even this morning. It could even be snow melt. And it can also be water from a hose that is not absorbed into the ground. So if excess water runs across your lawn, goes down your driveway, goes into the street, and it's going to travel all the way down that gutter to that big drain at the end of the street. That big drain is called a storm drain inlet, and it's there for one reason, to keep the streets from flooding. So what it does, it takes any sort of water from any multiple sources, and it connects it into a creek. And then that creek flows into one of our lakes or eventually into the Trinity River. And you might not know this, but the Trinity River flows 500 miles to the Gulf of Mexico. So that water and everything in it, so even good and bad. So if it picks up pollution, perhaps it picks up some oil that leaked into the street from a car. Maybe it picked up some lawn chemicals. Maybe it picked up some bacteria that was in pet waste. Maybe it picked up some litter that was on the sidewalk. All of that goes into our creeks and into our lakes and then the Trinity River and eventually into the Gulf of Mexico. So please be mindful about what you do outside because pollution does not stay at your home. It does not stay in your neighborhood. It doesn't even stay in the city. It can be transported many, many miles away. So I mentioned I'm a member of the Outreach and Engagement team, and we want to empower Dallas to save the earth. And we do that by doing virtual presentations like this and in person when we're allowed. If you were in Dallas, we can present for free for you, like for your HOA, if you have a club or organization that meets. We also have lots of materials for students anywhere from K to college, and we can also help you with your seminars, activities, and events. We also host a few of our own events. One of those is the Waterwise Landscape Tour in November. You can, and then also we have a climate change symposium happening this April, and in March we have Fix a Leak Week, and that's going to be a virtual Fix a Leak Week, and we're really excited about that. So to learn about the Waterwise Landscape Tour and Fix a Leak Week, visit savedallaswater.com for more information. Now, if you do invite us to talk about things, what do we talk about? Well, we can do environmental topics from A to Z, all the way from air quality to zero waste. So I invite you to visit our website, greendallas.net. If you want to invite us to come out to be a part of your event or your virtual experience, you can fill out the event request form, and then that's how you can get in contact with us. Of course, you can always send us an email. Write us at greendallas@dallascityhall.com if you ever need to reach me or any of my coworkers. And then, of course, follow us on social media. We are Green Dallas TX on Facebook and at Green Dallas on Twitter and Instagram. So you can learn about great programs we have coming up in the future and also all the cool things that you can be a part of. So with that, I am super excited to introduce our speaker today. And let's see here. Melissa Tyree is a gardener and designer based in Dripping Springs, Texas. She organically nourishes her half-acre home site with multiple raised vegetable gardens, over a dozen different fruit tree varieties, and native and adapted plants. Her most influential garden experience is spending her weekends growing up on a 500-acre Christmas tree farm in Northeast Texas and watching her parents convert to organic practices. Melissa holds a BS in civil engineering with a construction management specialty from Texas A&M University, and a MS in community and regional planning from the University of Texas. As a Hays County, Texas master gardener, she enjoys helping others discover the joy of raising their own food and enhancing their lives through growing plants in harmony with nature. So Melissa, thank you so much for joining us. Please share your screen and let's get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Helen. I appreciate the introduction and y'all hosting this today. I think it's a very timely topic. Obviously, a lot of people are interested. So like Helen said, my name's Did my screen just freeze? Are we good, Helen?
It still says loading. Oh, do we lose?
Yeah. I think Melissa just had to take a quick little break there. She's going to be back on in just a moment. We are going to have time for Q&A. So please add your questions into the chat like Vanessa mentioned, and there will be a break right after the inventory section. So you'll see there'll be a section about time and money, there'll be a section about inventory, and then we'll have a break for questions before we go into actual designs. All right, so,
all right,
I'm back. Yes, you're back, yes, and we can see your presentation.
Sorry, so I'm having flashbacks to a few weeks ago when we had no power. So like Helen said, my name is Melissa Tyree. I'm here in Dripping Springs. I grew up in Dallas. I've been designing gardens for myself and for my friends since 2002. I'm on my third personal garden here in Austin, and I just wanted to share some quick ideas of how I approach garden design when I'm starting from scratch, and how to grow with nature and to use what resources you have on hand. So I know this topic was on a lot of people's minds already as we spend more time at home, and we're looking to expand our living space from indoors to outdoors. And then even some of the experienced garden designers, I mean, we're looking at what should we do now that now that this happens. So I always say that when I was doing park planning, that Mother Nature always wins, but a good plan never hurts. So I know a lot of us are facing damage like this in our yards. This is the top of a beautiful live oak tree in my backyard that I lost to the ice. So I wanted to go over, a lot of people are asking, and I noticed in the chat, what do we do when Mother Nature doesn't stick to the plan, right? So we have these perfectly designed gardens, but sometimes things go wrong, like, you know, hours and hours on end of freezing weather in Austin, Texas. It just doesn't normally happen. So there's three main things that I'm telling people to do. If you have obviously broken branches, they're not coming back. So just go ahead and remove them, compost them, shred them, find good ways to recycle them, but, you know, go ahead and remove those now. If you have anything that's obviously mushy, mushy leaves, for example, this was a raised vegetable bed I had that completely froze solid. And this Swiss chard, unfortunately, as beautiful as it was, is not coming back. So if you have mushy leaves, just go ahead and remove those. Leave the roots on perennials because they have a good chance of coming back. But if it's any annuals with mushy leaves, just go ahead and remove those now. And then kind of the red area is the weight. So this was my beautiful Texas sage that the bees loved. And unfortunately, it just did not, the leaves did not survive that extreme freezing temperatures. So I am waiting on it. And as hard as it is to see that brown yard, I just encourage people to be patient, do a scratch test, see if there's anything still alive, and take it very slowly, especially with your native perennials, because I think a lot of them will surprise us and will bounce back from this frost. So that I can answer specific questions later on, but those are kind of my big three things: broken remove, mushy remove, brown just kind of wait and see for the next few weeks, especially since we're still getting some cold temperatures at night. So a little bit about me. Like Helen said, I spent my childhood weekends growing up on a 500-acre Christmas tree farm and my weeks south of Dallas growing up. We always had a vegetable garden. It had to be pretty hardy because it was always on the weekends. This is actually, Vanessa's actually my sister. So this is Vanessa and I planting a tomato here at our family garden. I love to travel, especially the gardens. My husband was in the travel industry for about 8 years. So I always loved going to botanical gardens, and I was born in Dallas, but I live here in Austin now. So from a design standpoint, I do approach things from a civil engineering standpoint sometimes because I do have that training. And I also got a degree in community and regional planning, and I specialize kind of in urban design with that degree. And then I do approach things a bit from a consulting standpoint because I do have experience as a consultant and a park planner, technology founder, and even a real estate agent. So I'm always thinking in the back of my mind about real estate and resale value when I approach my designs. And then finally, most recently, I was able to get my Master Gardener certification in 2019 here in Hays County. So you're probably wondering why so much about Melissa. And that's because I think that number one rule with garden design is that it is very personal. So just, you can have all these rules in place, but above all else, you really need to think about yourself most importantly because this is a garden that you're going to see, it's your personal garden every day. So keep in mind that design is just a very, very personal thing. For me, I've identified my top three things. This is my backyard. For me, I grew up on a tree farm. Trees are the number one thing for me. I will always plant trees, the very first thing. And as I approach any design, I'll always have some element of raising food. That's my little vegetable garden that you saw earlier that was frozen underneath my dining room windows. And then I'll always approach it with nature. So a lot of people ask, why did I put the pool like this? So we needed a lap lane for my kids, and I had 2 rows of trees. So I literally squeezed the pool in between all of the trees so that we didn't have to remove anything. So for me, I will always try to preserve the nature that's already there in a design. So I'm going to approach it I have 4 main steps when I approach a design, and that's the inventory, and then a base drawing, a concept drawing, and the actual implementation. I'm going to spend most of our 30 minutes on the inventory because I think it's what most people skip over, and it's probably the most important thing in any garden design is to know what you're actually working with before you start designing. I consider it like if you were going to go grocery shopping, you wouldn't run out and just peruse the aisles and buy everything. First, you would check your pantry and you would check your fridge and you would see what you have before you ran out and started buying new things. As much as I love to run out to a garden center and just buy all the plants and bring them home and put them in the ground, you really need to know what you're working with before you start. So I'll break the inventory down into two things. There's the stuff that you can see and you can observe in your garden design, and then there's the things on your site that you won't be able to see, and oftentimes we forget about those. So first, you need to look at your site and decide the boundaries of what you're designing. For me, this is my half-acre lot here in Austin. So the boundaries are very defined. I have a fence on 4 sides and a road in front. I would encourage you to look at your big picture, your overall design, and not start designing very specific area first. So look at your total site and not just design the front yard, because you may miss something along the way. So whether it's your yard or maybe a school garden, look at the overall picture first and define your boundaries. The next thing you want to look at, and we oftentimes skip this, is your soil. You should get a soil test done. It's only about $12. Your county extension agent can do it, and I have a link down in the resources, but it really tells you a lot. I grew up, in the sandy soils of East Texas where they're acidic and you can grow all kinds of things. And then I come down to the rocky, clay loam soil of Austin that's high in alkalinity. So you really need to know what you're working with before you begin planting anything. The next thing you want to do is dig a test hole before you start planting anything. So these are my 2 most recent homes. They're only a mile apart, but they are 2 very different soil structures. The house on the left with the rock wall, the builder had removed all of the topsoil down to the bedrock and brought in 2 layers of builder soil. So, if you dig a test hole in there, it's going to be very different from the site on the right, where I have 12 to 14 inches of soil just a mile down the road because of the site and where it was and located next to a wet weather creek. So I highly encourage you to dig a couple of samples, your front yard, your backyard. It may be different depending upon what has happened at that site over time. So of course, on the left, I built up, and on the right, I was able to plant some things in the ground. The next thing you want to know is your soil composition. So how much sand, loam, and clay do you have in your soil? This is really important to know because different plants like different types of soil. So you can do a simple soil jar test. I didn't include it here, but just Google soil jar test, and it's a texture analysis you can do at home on your own. And it will give you an approximate breakdown of how much sand, loam, and clay that you have in your soil. The cheater way to do it is to go out to the USDA Web Soil Survey. These are soil surveys that were done a long time ago. They have thankfully digitized them so that you can search by your address and pull up your soil map. So I pulled up mine because I was curious. It's the Bracket Rock Outcrop Comfort Complex 1 to 8% slopes. And what this can tell you, what I'm specifically looking for in here is this profile. So this is your profile of your soil, and it's pretty spot on for my location. 0 to 6 inches is paragravelly clay loam. So clay loam with some rocks. And then from 6 to 14 inches, it gets more rocks. And then once you hit 14 inches, you're at bedrock for the next from 14 to 60 inches. So this is super helpful information if you are looking to purchase a site. You can go out and pull this information before you even make a purchase for a plot of land. So I highly encourage you to go out and check out your web soil survey. The next thing you need to consider when you're designing is your water. So I break water into 2 categories. One is the natural water, and then the man-made water. So for the natural water, you need to look at your flow of your rainfall. Today was probably a good example. You can go out and look and see where the rain was going. This is my neighbor's yard, and unfortunately for them, they've had to do a lot of work to slow this flow of runoff from the rain because a lot of it comes from the backyard all the way to the front yard. So you can do some different things to think about that. You need to look at areas where there's standing water. I've had to put drains in my yards before, excuse me, because of standing water. And then you want to look down into ways we manipulate water on a site. Do you have gutters? Do you have rainwater collection? This was my original irrigation plan for my yard. It's changed many times since then, but you need to think about what irrigation you've already put in and will you have to make changes to that. Next up is light. So this is something that you can observe slowly over time. You need to think where the sun comes up, where the sun sets, and realize that that will change with the seasons. And then observe the patterns of shade in your yard. This is a walkway that I put in, and I was trying to decide what to plant to the right there where the mulched area is. And a really simple way to do this is just to go out and take photos with your camera, your cell phone every day. So take one in the morning, take one a few hours later, and just observe the patterns. It will influence what plants you choose for each location in your design. And then vegetation. So what do you already have? This is the same thing with the grocery list. What do you have? I always suggest researching, just make a list. There's a little spreadsheet here that I have. You can put where the plant is, its common name, and then its botanical name if you can find it, what type of plant it is, and then try to research how big ultimately that plant will be. How high will it grow? How much will it spread? I know when I bought my home, the builders put in a lot of really inappropriate plants that now have just converged on each other and created one giant mass of plants because it looked good when they were in a gallon pot, and what they are now just isn't appropriate for the site. And then look at what type of light it requires. Is it an evergreen? Is it deciduous? And then really think about the colors and of the plants. There's a lot of different colors for these different varieties. Next up, you want to think about what you want to keep and what you want to remove from your inventory. So maybe it's invasive. Maybe you should go ahead and take it out. Maybe it's diseased or damaged. Especially now, I'm looking at a lot of damaged plants that I'm probably going to have to remove from my current inventory. So do a little research that'll help you out to make sure you want to keep what's already existing on your site. And there's three other things I kind of grouped together in this slide. I was redoing a patio area in my backyard. So you want to think about what elevation you're at. Even in Austin, we do have some hills, and what you can plant on those hills is different than what you can plant in a valley. So I'm kind of in a valley, a little more protected. You need to think about your prevailing winds on your site. If you are on one of those top of the hills, there are plants that won't want to grow there. And then this is a good example of the slope of my yard. So it starts higher at the street in the front and then slopes back to the creek. And I just recommend that you work with it. When I designed the pool, we didn't do any drastic changes to the slope. We just worked with what we had. And you want to maintain that slope so that you do preserve the existing drainage of your site. Next up are structures. Think about anything that's permanently fixed to your site, your house, any sheds, fences that are already there, a pool, retaining walls, sidewalks, anything that is immovable. You want to do an inventory of those and add them to your base drawing later on. And then think about your views. So this is super important. Originally, when we built our house, we were the first one on the street. We put in a pool. The houses went up next to us, and both of the neighbors have a gorgeous view of our pool from their back porches. So think about your views, what you want to see from the inside of your home out. Take a picture of the window. Think about what you can see standing at different points in your yard, on your site. And then, you just want to keep that in the back of your mind because you may want to do some things like I planted some evergreen screens to manipulate the views. Next up is weather. So I would like to say this is a good defining thing, but you should know your USDA hardiness zone. I believe in Dallas, you're 8A, Austin, we're 8B. And this will just give you a good idea of what plants you can grow there. So know your zone, know your average first freeze, your average last freeze, and your average rainfall. So that's a good thing to keep in your back of your mind when you're selecting plants. Of course, it's subject to change, like it did a few weeks ago, but it's kind of a good starting point. Next up, I would highly encourage you to use Texas 811. There are above ground and below ground utilities that you may not be able to see. This is a free service. They'll come out and they'll flag your yard. You'll know where your electrical is, water, any communications that they are, and they'll flag them. And because you don't want to end up planting a Christmas tree, sorry, you don't want to end up planting a huge tree where they'll eventually need access to your gas line. So really think about this, and I would encourage you to do this multiple times in the project, initially, and then when you're about to dig, because sometimes you even forget where these are. And then think about your easements. Oftentimes lots will have drainage easements, public utility easements, you'll have building setback lines, so include those in your inventory along with your utilities. So that kind of covered all the things you can see, and then there's kind of some more things that you can't see that you should consider in your inventory. And number one is rules. Anywhere you live, you probably have some sort of rules. I live in an HOA. I have very specific rules about what I can and can't plant in my HOA. So go out, look at your deed restrictions, look at your HOA documents, find out what they allow and they don't allow. And then your city may have requirements too. In Austin, we have impervious cover. So if you're thinking about doing hardscaping, you need to go out and review those. County rules and state rules may apply depending upon what you're trying to accomplish on your site. So you don't want to put something in and then find out later on it's not allowed. That would be a very expensive mistake. This one's a fun one. I always enjoy going out and looking at the historical uses of a site. You can download Google Earth Pro to your computer and they will have a little slider and you can look at your change over time. So this is my home, originally ranch land, cattle were run here. Then they put in the utilities in the second picture, and then finally they put in the roads. So this gives me a good idea of what the natural setting was, what grew here, pretty recently. And I think that's always fun to go out and look and see for a site. Next up is your style. So this is another thing that's really important. What's going to influence your plant selection, your materials? I recommend starting a Pinterest board. It's kind of what I do with friends that I work with. It's a great way to exchange ideas. We can add pictures of what they like, what they don't like. And then look at your neighborhood. Just go around and see what's doing well in your neighborhood. Take pictures. Don't be too creepy, but like, this is my beautiful Texas sage before it turned brown. Everybody always complimented me on it. So, look and see what does well, plant-wise, material-wise in your neighborhood. And then finally, my very favorite thing to do is to visit botanical gardens. I know the Wildflower Center here in Austin has some gorgeous demonstration garden. The Dallas Botanical Garden has the same. It's a great way to go out and just take pictures, look at ideas, and get a sense of your style. So how do you want to use your just make a list. Do you need a utility area for a potting bench? Do you want a lawn area for your dogs and your kids to play on? Are you going to extend your living area? Do you have a public facing area of your yard? And my favorite is growing food. I designate a large part of my garden designs to growing food. So just think about ways you want to use your site. And the next up are the big two, time and money. So I do most of everything myself for my garden, but it does take a lot of time. So, do you want to haul yards and yards of soil? It takes a weekend to move that much soil. Do you want to move all these heavy pavers? It saves a ton of money, but you may have to visit the doctor. So, this is a patio project that I worked on. The only thing that I outsourced was the welding. I unfortunately didn't know how to weld, so I had to hire a welder, but everything else, I hauled and moved and placed myself. So then think about your budget. DIY saves thousands of dollars. When I went out to bid this patio project, it was in the $20,000 to $30,000 range, and I probably ended up spending $5,000 to $7,000 doing it myself. So think about your budget and think about what you can do yourself versus what you need to hire out, like a welder, if you don't have that skill set. All right, so that's kind of all the inventory. I don't know if we have questions now. If we want to
we do. Of course, we have questions. Okay, so Melissa, could you please go over your 3 tips about the winter freeze damage? And if you could maybe give any specific advice for shrubs, you mentioned your Texas sage, and then also if you have any advice about palms specifically a sago palm.
Oh, sago palms. Okay. Yeah. So the three things that you should do, if it's broken, just remove it, trim it back, and compost it. If it's mushy, like you can just tell the leaves aren't coming back, they stink. I know my yard smells right now really badly. Remove any mushy things, and then wait on everything else. If it's not broken or mushy, just wait. For the sago palms, they get hit really hard. But the hope is that that core is still there. So if you have brown leaves on them, I would go, since you're in Dallas, I would probably wait a couple more weeks because they do provide some protection to that, the base of the plant. I would go ahead and wait, but they will need to be removed, in a couple of weeks. I would go ahead after the chance of last like 40 degrees, I would go ahead and remove those leaves from the sago palms. Did I answer everything, Helen? Is that
right? And then, we had one person who they were sad about their azaleas, and so maybe just a little bit of advice about the shrub. You mentioned a scratch test.
Yes. So if you look at your azalea, it's probably really sad. It's but if you do a little scratch test, I would start towards the top, the limbs. If the limbs are crispy now, they're probably dead and can be removed. As you move down the limbs, you can scratch with your thumb just gently. If you see green and that sublayer of bark, then that is still living plant tissue that you can leave. So I would go ahead and wait if you can. But if you see any green, then it's still living. And I would wait to remove those crispy things because they do provide some protection. But yeah, if you see green on the bark scratch test, then it may have survived.
All right, good. Everyone's hoping for that green underneath their bark. Okay, so do you have some recommendations for plants that do well in lightly sloped backyards with a lot of shade?
Oh, so I'm learning about shade plants because this is new to me, having a shady garden. Is this in Dallas or probably in Dallas?
I'm assuming, yes, it's in Dallas.
Yes. Okay. So I actually have some in the resources. I have some plant lists that I like to work off of. Goodness. Yeah, let's do that at the end because I do have some plant lists that we can look at. So
okay, perfect. All right. One of our viewers wants to add privacy and glamour to their front yard. And so what plants can they put around their sewer and water line entrances to the house?
Oh, that's tricky. Okay, so nothing with deep roots. I've unfortunately seen people that plant like a crepe myrtle over their sewer to create privacy, and they end up having to remove it and pay all the money to remove the roots from the drains. So I would stick to short, that's a tricky one because you need something with shallow roots and
a wow factor.
A wow factor. Yeah. Tough. I love my Texas sages because they don't have deep roots, but they just didn't hold up with the freeze. So let's look at that at the end too, because I have a couple of playlists. I'll try to keep that in mind. The shady slope plants and the wow factor over the sewer lines. Okay.
All right. So now we're shifting to roses and rosette disease. All right. So unfortunately, one of our viewers has lost some roses, and she's wondering, or they're wondering, if they're worth retrying, basically replanting more roses, or put something else in their place.
Yes. So I actually lost all of my gorgeous antique roses to rosette disease because I had interplaced them with some others, and then my neighbors planted them, and we all got it. So I removed the whole plant. You bag it up, take out the roots, throw it away. Don't compost it. And I'm waiting. I replaced mine with some native salvia because they have they're both pink. They do better in the drought. So I am not recommending anyone plant roses right now because there's no way to treat the rosette disease, unfortunately. So I would just hold off, find a native perennial, similar color, similar height. That's what I went with the salvia autumn sage because it gave me the same height as the roses. That would be my recommendation, is to hold off. You can do Texas Aggie Extension Agency has some great articles on rosette, but I would just wait.
That is true. And so I do know if the person asking this question, if you are local to the Dallas area, visit Lake Cliff Park. They had a rose garden and it got hit with the disease also. And so they have redone it, and I believe they planted a lot of abelias in the place. And so abelias, you can also get ones with colorful leaves too. So it does add a lot of color. So try taking a visit to Lake Cliff Park and checking out their garden to see some real, some plants in real life there. All right, and then, okay, so now we have a question about succulents. Do you have some suggestions for succulents that are good for North Texas to plant by a river?
Oh, by a river? I would stick with natives because anything by a river, has a chance of washing downstream. So I don't particularly know what native succulents are, but I would just hesitate to plant anything non-native near a stream or a source of water because it can become invasive would be my suggestion. And succulents got hit hard, hit hard by the frost too. So that's an interesting question.
I know it is. Okay, and so one of our viewers has a comment to add to that they've seen some attractive earth berms that could create privacy and might solve any rooting problems that you have by your river. So there is also engineered solutions and hardscape solutions that might help too.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, that's a great idea. I like the idea.
Okay, we have one more question and then we're going to move on. So speaking of kind of like those succulents, and also I saw this with my neighbors. So we have one of our viewers has blue agaves that have mushy leaves, but the core is still standing. What is your suggestion on how to trim that? Like my poor neighbor, they had those huge cacti. They were bigger than me. And yeah, the outer ones have all just drooped down, but there is this triangle thing right in the middle, just standing straight as can be.
Yeah, I should have had a picture of my shark skin agave in here, and I took it out because it made me so sad. What I'm hearing is as long as you have that core and the core is not mushy, my core is mushy, so I think I've lost mine. But if you have that core and it's non-mushy, carefully remove those mushy leaves from around the agaves because the sap has a substance in it that is very caustic, I guess, to skin. So wear gloves, wear long sleeve shirts, do not get the sap. I've actually saw somebody trimming theirs with like a giant pole saw so they didn't get anywhere near the leaves of the agave. I've seen two conflicting things. Some people say go ahead and remove those leaves now, and some say wait a few more weeks until the last kind of chance of frost. So that one, I think even the experts are kind of up in the air because those agaves, this is kind of new territory for us. But so what I'm doing is I'm waiting and then carefully removing those mushy leaves from the agaves.
I like the idea about using the pole saw. That's very, very clever. And some of them have really long spines on them. So yeah, you got to be really careful on those.
Yeah, don't get too close.
Exactly. So all right, well, so that's fantastic. I can't wait to see the next section.
Awesome. So now we're moving into drawings, and I have a few example projects. One is my current home, the half acre here in Austin, Texas. One is I helped with a regenerative educational farm here in Dripping Springs. They were converting like a 12-acre site from a single family home to a teaching and learning area. So I got to help them with a design for that. This top left picture was the learning garden that they had there. And then the bottom right, it was a horse arena that they wanted to convert to additional garden space next to the goat barn. So how do you do your base drawing? And I have two main ways that I like to do a base drawing and some combination of there. Probably the easiest to obtain is your satellite image from Google Maps. As long as it's a recent, they've recently photographed your area, it's a really great way to get started. You can even do measurements on there. So I went ahead and tested my site to see if the measurements were pretty accurate. If you go to Google Maps and you right click and you say measure distance, you can drop a point. And I measured the back of my fence line and it was pretty spot on. So it's a great way to get a base drawing is your Google Maps if it's recent. The next way to, this was the regenerative farm here in Dripping Springs, Texas. You can see the remnants of the arena there, the oval shape right above the barn, and then that learning garden. So I didn't have a survey for this particular site, but because Google Maps was so accurate in the measurements, I could use this, this drawing to work off of for that plan. So Google Maps is one way, and then if you have your survey, it's probably the best way. They're accurate measurements. When you purchase your house, they should have provided it for you. It includes things like your building setback lines and your utility easements on there. Anything that was permanent when you purchased the home should be on there. Your houses, their driveways, your sidewalks. Anything that you've added afterwards will not be on there. So what I do usually is take a combination of the survey and then Google Maps and tracing paper to create my base map. So this is my survey overlaid with a piece of tracing paper that I took the existing trees off of the satellite image and overlaid the two. When I was going through engineering school, I was kind of the last class that did hand drawing and digital drawing. So I like to do a combination of those two. And this is a really simple way. So just take your tracing paper with a satellite image scaled the same as your survey. And it's a great way to kind of combine the vegetation and the existing structures. And then if you don't have Google Maps for some reason and you don't have a survey, you've just got to go old school and get out a long tape measure and just start taking measurements and drawing them onto graph paper. So once you have your base drawing, then you can create your concept plan. So this is one I did for a friend. After walking the site and discussing with them what their needs were, I just took their existing survey, put it into SketchUp, and then print it out and use it as a sheet of tracing paper. So simple, easy, low-key way, and you can make lots of changes. So that's the base map underneath with tracing paper on top, and then these are the different ways they wanted to use their site. They had a veggie garden, shade garden, cut flower garden. They wanted to add some pollinator gardens, and then they had kind of like 2 rock wall areas that they wanted to plant different things in. This is a really simple way. In this particular case, there wasn't a lot of flow involved, but this is the regenerative farm here in Dripping Springs. And here I started adding in flows and walkways and ways people would move around the site. And you can see those in the pathways. So it doesn't have to be fancy. It's just, a really simple way to make sure that you have everything from your inventory on this concept and think about the use of space before you start going into a detailed drawing. And here you can see I started adding some things like there was a road, there was a setback, the vegetation that was already there. And this is just, again, trace paper overlaid on top of the Google Maps. So after you have your base map and you've made sure your concept carries over everything from your inventory that you want, then you can start going into detailed plans. So for detailed plans, I like using a free software called SketchUp. So this is just the Google satellite image of the farm imported into SketchUp, and then I can start drawing on top of that some, broad-reaching categories of what I want. In this particular case, I did it in SketchUp, and then I switched back to hand drawing. So I love using a combination of those two. So I imported the satellite image into SketchUp, then I did some work in SketchUp, and then to do some more detailed drawings, I just put a piece of trace paper over the top and started working on the details of this plan. And then if I'd continued on with this one, I probably would have imported it back into SketchUp so that I could start taking measurements easily from SketchUp. And that's a free software. I'll put a link in the resources. Really easy to use. It's just a CAD software that has a free version for personal use. This is another detail drawing. I started from this one, I worked from a survey, started working on different areas that they wanted to use the yard. They wanted some very specific plantings. I would encourage you in your detailed drawings to use, I love markers. I have a big set of markers to try to designate different things with different colors to help you give a visual sense of things. And these are all 2D drawings. I'll go into 3D drawings here in a second. And then I encourage you, this is done in SketchUp. It's really easy to import different pre-made plants designs in there. And then you just move the plants around based upon their spacing. So I'll scale them to the appropriate, width that they'll get, and then start placing plants onto my base drawing. So it can be as technical as that one in SketchUp, or it can be as simple as this. I had my plant list on the right here, and then I just started plugging things into a SketchUp drawing on the left. Sometimes I will think about the size plant I want first, or sometimes I adjust it based upon if there's just a plant that someone has to have. Like in this particular case, I think they had like a Japanese maple somewhere in there that we just had to work around. So, and then you can go back and forth between your plant list and then your detailed planting plan and figure out what plants will work in the particular space. So it can be really, really simple and really ugly. Like this is one of the first ones I ever did. It's just graph paper and a pre-made stencil, and I knew the scale that I was working with, and I knew the size of the plants. And that's the most important thing, is that you make sure that you have those two concepts, the size that you're working with, and then your plant, the size of your plants. So if you want a 3D drawing, I think they're super cool. Sometimes it's hard to visualize off of a 2D drawing what it will look like. I use a very simple cheating technique I learned in school. So I'll take a photograph of the site. These are a couple of different houses I've worked on. And then I will overlay one piece of tracing paper, and with a thin black Sharpie outline the major features of the house. And then I'll put another piece of tracing paper on top of that and start dropping in new plants. In both these cases, we wiped out pretty much everything that was there because they had gone from a sunny location to a very shaded location as the trees matured. So this is just a fun, quick way to do a 3D drawing by hand. And then of course, this is in SketchUp. So this is a more detailed drawing, 3D plan. I can spin it around and visualize it and take measurements off of it. And this is another fun way to do 3D drawings. And then once you get that, you can even go into a greater level of detail. So these are a stair riser that I designed, the staircase that I designed, and then kind of a detailed paver plan for a pathway. And finally, I would say just make a drawing. It doesn't have to be pretty, but it just needs to be detailed. So this is an irrigation plan I did when I had very young children. You can see Molly signed it. She scribbled on it. But the most important part of this plan is that I could take quantities off of it so that I could create a shopping list of what I needed for this irrigation plan. Finally, we'll get to the implementation. I'll go over this real quick because I want to leave time for questions for everybody. But when I do an implementation plan, a project plan, I like to break it down by the area of the yard and what you want to accomplish in that area. So for this yard refresh, we had a live oak flower bed in the front yard, and we needed to remove plants. We needed to check on the irrigation that was already there, level the soil out, add a metal border, optionally install landscape fabric, think about what plantings we were going to do there, and then they were putting in some hardscaping with some aggregate. And then, so I just break it down by area of the yard, because as a DIY person, you're probably only going to work on a specific area of your yard at each time, rather than go in and do all the irrigation all over the yard. So when you're thinking about your plan, break it down, step by step in the order that you need to do it, and by the area of the yard. And then make your plant list. This is probably my favorite part. I have a master plant list, this master Google spreadsheet that I like to pick and choose from when I'm helping friends out. This is our final selections for a friend. It tells you where it's going. I've color coded it by the feature colors. So green things are green, purple things are purple, pink things are pink. And then we decided what size plant to purchase. So 4-inch, 3-gallon, and add in your budget, how much that's going to cost. And then again, what type of plant it is, how big it's going to get, the light requirements, and deciduous or evergreen. And then your budget. So I like to create a pretty simple budget with different options for people when I'm helping out friends. So, edging, we had 3 different edgings, different price points, different styles, planters, gravel, and then what it is, how much you need. So that's where your detailed drawing comes into play, that you can, you need how, like in this case, we needed 56 linear feet of edging. So then you can go out and figure out how many bundles of edging you need to buy, where you're going to get it from, and just start creating this really simple budget that will guide you. And you can do it piecemeal by each section of your yard, or you can try to get a budget overall. Be sure to double check prices because they're constantly changing. I wouldn't do any plumbing right now. I don't know, it's hard to find PVC here in Austin at least, but just start thinking about your budget and try to, after you've purchased it, go back and plug in so you can keep a running total of what you've spent. I'm going to leave you with like my top 3 design guidelines that I use. And Vanessa can probably tell me who made this quote, but like, nature hates a vacuum. So when you're designing, think about your spacing of your plants and think about what you're going to do between the time you plant them and the time they mature, because there's going to be space there. You can't leave bare soil, and you need to put down mulch. You need something there, otherwise nature's going to move in and do whatever it wants. So if you leave bare soil, you're going to get weeds. So always think about the progression of a plant growing and making sure you have something there. Otherwise, something will move in that you do not want. And then plant this, not that. So a lot of us have moved around. Like we had the question about azaleas. I love azaleas. They love the acidic soil, but I cannot grow them here. They just will not grow in Austin. So you have to think about something that's similar to what you love sometimes and plant that. So I've learned to love some of the autumn sages, some other, really pretty pink plants. So just think about what you love may not grow where you want it to, like hydrangeas. And then think about a diversity in your garden designs versus a monoculture. That's, in nature, there are no monocultures. So think about planting a diversity of plants, especially given weather events. You will not want everything to fail at one time. So don't plant like the rose gardens. So beautiful, beautiful rose gardens, rose rosette moves in, you've lost your entire garden. Think about planting a variety of things. And then this is just kind of fun. This is kind of the evolution of my vegetable garden. I started off with coal lumber, super cheap, very young family. I built that very cheaply. Going to the fence company, getting cheap dollar boards. But my kids loved it. I loved it. Probably my favorite garden. And then I moved into kind of the middle one is my second house. It got a little bigger, a little harder to maintain, put in irrigation. And then finally, when my third house, this is my primary vegetable garden. I switched from cedar to metal, kind of evolved over time. I think it's just kind of fun to see how things, your design changes over time. So that brings us back to questions.
Oh, Melissa, you're on mute. Could you please unmute?
Yes.
There you go.
All
right.
Sorry, have I been muted this whole time?
Just a tiny bit, just a tiny bit. When you switch to your resource slides.
Okay. So I think that Vanessa will send these out, but I do have a few resource slides. One are things that I use for the inventory. One is a list of great landscape if you want more details about drawings, landscape design, some fun online seed sources. It's going to be really hard this year to get your seeds. Order them now or go to the seed library. And then some water-wise landscaping, some other great ways to just conserve water.
All right, thank you, Melissa. Those resource slides are going to come in handy. And if you did pre-register for this presentation, those resources will be shared with you in an email in a couple of days. And if you didn't and you'd like them, just drop an email to greendallas@dallascityhall.com, and we'll make sure and share those resources with you. So, all right, so we do have some questions, some new ones that came in. All right, let's start with.
That's really good questions.
Yes, I know. Okay, all right, this is a tree question.
Okay.
Is it true that a slow growing tree will do less damage to pavement and surrounding areas?
Well, I think initially, that would be true, but I think you want to consider, your placement, because eventually, the tree's root structure will grow over time. So, um, yeah, that's a hard one, because you hope your tree lives a long time and grows deep roots. So I would definitely try to keep them away from permanent structures, even a slow growing one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the rule of thumb is as big as your crown, that's how big your root structure is, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
as your tree grows here, it's also growing underneath at the same time.
Yes.
And that's something sometimes we forget about because we don't see that.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I would just keep those away from your utilities, any permanent structures, things like that.
Mhm. All right. So, okay, so everyone is fascinated with your irrigation that we got a little peek of in your photos there. So, do you have some resources on DIY irrigation?
Oh, for sure. So I prefer the brown drip irrigation. I just get it at Home Depot or Lowe's, any of your big box stores. And I'm trying to think what slide we saw that in. So this is kind of my DIY irrigation. It was literally water hoses connected to the brown drip irrigation in combination with some black solid pipes. And I just took a water hose from my spigot and ran it out to the garden. And then I had like a 4-way diverter on it that I created my own little zones. So I had 4 zones in there, and I could plant different plants and water them differently. So it was a really kind of DIY irrigation plan. It worked great. I had no problems with this one.
I think irrigation can be intimidating to a lot of folks, you know.
Yeah, I would say drawing it out helps. And then, the manufacturers usually have recommendations on spacing. So here I had 4x8 beds, and I had 3 of those brown pipes down the middle, and it was good for most plants. But I would definitely go out to the manufacturers and look and see what they recommend as far as spacing is concerned. And I didn't run this all the time. This is something that I only ran. I had a manual timer because I forget to turn things off. So I would set a manual timer on the spigot, and you can just run it for 30 minutes. In the morning, every 2 or 3 days if needed, in the summertime.
Absolutely. And you're right, the technology has gotten easier and easier. And sometimes you just need to kind of, just like get a few things, practice a little bit, and get over any sort of hesitation you might have. And then you'll realize that it is absolutely a DIY. And I loved how you showed that not only are you making plans or designs for your garden, but it's also your irrigation and the other things that go in your garden, including your hardscape. It's not just the plants. And sometimes I get, I just think that the design is just about plants, but it's about everything that goes out in your landscape. All right, so we have a question about, do you have any recommendations for apps or websites for tracking the sun? And, because we have somebody who is in a new residence, they moved in December, and they're still trying to figure out their sun because they haven't been here a full year.
Yeah, I was trying to find one for this presentation, and I don't think I've really found one that I love. That is a really good question, because I was wanting to show what at my site, tracking the sun. So I do not. I was trying to find one, and I couldn't really find one that was awesome, that was user friendly. So I unfortunately don't.
Have you tried Google Solar? Have you tried that one?
Oh, no. Google Solar. Okay, no.
So I do know that that's recommended, like if you want to get solar panels and you need to track the sun across your property for solar panels. So I'm wondering if that might be a good one to try. And we also have a recommendation from a viewer about Google Earth Pro does have an option to show the sun tracking.
Oh, perfect. Awesome.
Yeah, so it looks like Google is going to be our friend there with Google Earth Pro, and also maybe give a try to Google Solar.
Google Solar.
All
Okay.
right. And okay, so we have a question about your metal beds. So why did you choose the metal raised beds over cedar?
Yes. So obviously I'd used cedar. It was super cheap at first, and then cedar started rapidly getting more and more expensive as as we progressed. So in the middle garden here, it started to rot. I had been there. I put the garden in 2011, and after about 5 years, some of the boards have started to rot, and it's quite expensive. if you buy the 2x8 lumber like that I was using. So these metal beds actually ended up being more cost effective. And as I get older, I like to have things a little taller. So these were taller beds. So I ended up going with cheaper, taller, and hopefully they'll last as long as I'm in this home. That's why I made the switch. This garden does get a lot of shade, probably more shade than your typical vegetable garden. So it is something that you need to think about. If they're in full sun, they can get pretty hot.
I also had seen a post about somebody who made very similar beds with the metal, and when the sun actually reflected off of the beds, like, you know, into their house. So he actually took these boards, like these, I don't know kind of what it was, cedar boards or whatever, and he put them on the sides so that the sun wouldn't reflect off of that. So, you know, hey, gardening design is an experience, and also it's not static, right?
Yeah.
There are different things that happen that are going to have you tweak your design over time, whether it's reflected sun or, you know, shade canopy. You know, as your trees mature, the shade is going to change and stuff like that. So just that's something else that, yes, gardening is not static, exactly. And then you're going to have to tweak your design maybe every couple of years or something like that. And but that's part of the fun of it, right?
For sure. And I will say these metal beds you probably see in the picture, they are on limestone blocks because of my slope of my yard to level them out. So I didn't end up with crazy bent metal beds. I did put a border of limestone stones simply to level them out. But the cedar, it's a lot easier to level than these metal beds. It's something that I learned when I installed these.
That's a good point. I never thought about that. All right, so let's jump. Actually, so we're talking about like maybe trees with shallow roots. Some person was asking maybe about a Japanese maple, since they're not super fast growers. So I don't know if you've had any experience with Japanese maples and their root structure. And also we had a viewer who just suddenly last year lost their Japanese maples, even a big one, and they weren't sure about the cause of it. I don't know if you've heard about maybe something like that happening to somebody else.
Yeah, so we don't grow a lot of, I know they're really popular in Dallas, but we don't grow a lot of Japanese maples in Austin, and it's mainly the heat, I think, that gets them down here. So if you have them down here, you baby them a lot. But I do know people plant them very close to their houses. I'm assuming they don't have a giant root structure because they don't get very big. You know, they're a smaller tree. So something like, if you do have a smaller, understory tree, that would be something to plant, closer to your house. Although I would caution, like crepe myrtles, they look so unassuming. You plant them close to your house, and the next thing you know, they're 30 feet tall and have a giant root structure. I know I'm going to run into that problem here with one that my builder put in. So I don't know a lot about Japanese maples because they're more, they're better suited to Dallas than to Austin.
Absolutely, they are. You're right. They are very popular here, but yes, they are an understory tree, so they like being in the shade underneath other trees. And you're right, their shade requirements and their water requirements are a little bit different. All right, so we got another new question, and then we're going to pop back to a couple of those questions from earlier.
Okay.
All right, so any recommendations on native plants that can be used for privacy along a fence?
Oh, okay. So I have my favorites here in Austin. One I like to use is wax myrtles. They're a native. Well, they're at our farm, so I'm assuming they're native. Ness may have to chime in, but I love wax myrtles because they're an evergreen screen. I like trying to incorporate, it's not a native, but I've been using a lot of loquats because they give me fruit and they are evergreen, and they seem to have held up well to the freeze here. So I would assume they would do okay in Dallas as well. Let's think about I try to work in edibles as much as possible, like fruiting trees. So the wax myrtles, the loquats. Here we can pull off olive trees, which are evergreen, but I don't know that they would do as well in Dallas. We're kind of at the border of olive trees. It's a good question too. And the link in the resources, sometimes my mind goes blank on plants, but there's a link to a Grow Green guide here in Austin that's all native and adaptive plants for the area, and it's divided by, I have one here, let me show you. So it looks like this. It's in PDF form, and it's a gorgeous book they put out here in Austin. And inside, it's divided by the types of plants. So it's a really great resource. I would also reach out to the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. They have a lot of research on natives too. That would probably be a great way, and they have them broken down by shrubs and trees. And I would go out and look at some of theirs because it's going to be a very specific site requirement for each plant.
I agree. That's all good resources. And you did have some of those links in your resources there that you listed. And some of them, like Texas Smartscape and some of the others you had are North Texas specific. And I think on the Lady Bird Johnson one too, you can put your region in. And so it'll make sure to recommend plants that are specific for your zone and your region. Okay, so we're going to get back to some of those harder questions from earlier. So hopefully your mind processed some of those. Or maybe
these plant questions are hard.
I know, aren't they? They are. Okay, so we're going to go back to visit the one about the recommendations for shady plants to plant on a slope.
Goodness. Like I wonder how big of a slope we're talking about. Like, is this like for erosion control or? That would be my question.
Let's see. Yes, for erosion control.
For erosion control. Oh goodness. That is a very
ground cover would be nice. Maybe like
I'm thinking a type of native ground cover. Like I would just make sure you stay away from some of the more invasive ones. Let's see here. So down here, I like to use this creeping germander. Does really well here. It held up to the freeze. It's got beautiful purple leaves on it. That's a really pretty one. I think it can take some shade. Liriope is actually making kind of a comeback. I remember it from when I was a kid, but if you plant it in such a way that it would be pretty and it can take the shade. I call it monkey grass. That's a common name. It can hold some shade. Sedges. I don't know about in Dallas, but here in Austin, sedges hold up really well to the frost. They just grow natively here. I left them in my yard. They're beautiful kind of structural plants. So I like to incorporate a lot of sedges, and they can take the shade. I'm trying to think of a good vining plant that can take the shade too.
Yeah, there's Asian jasmine, probably one of the, kind of the traditional ones, but but also we had someone who recommended ajuga.
Yes.
That's another one that's gaining in popularity. That's a much more common one. So.
And it can take the shade, yeah. And that's another one I remember from my childhood, holding up really well in Dallas.
Okay, so our question about we want the glamour in the front yard and the shallow roots.
That's
we're going to tackle that.
Do some type of fencing structure. Like I would recommend some of the, the prettier vines. That shallow root structure is really hard. It's going to have to be something not very big. I'd almost have to see the site. Like that's a really hard one for me to visualize. Shallow roots in that site. So,
well, Melissa, do you mind going to the slide that had your email address on?
Yes, for sure. There we go. So you can follow along on Instagram as I recover from the damage. And if you do have more questions, when my mind's not toast from the recovering from the frost, I probably can come up with some better suggestions.
Yeah, and also I know we are stretching you a little bit because you are in a different zone from us. So you're doing fantastic with having to basically have a foot in each side of 8A and 8B there.
Yeah, and it is pretty different what we can get away with down here versus up there. So.
Exactly. Oh, this is a good one. The Purple Heart. That is one that would probably do well because it'll grow just about anywhere.
Yes, I give it away every year. So literally just take a cutting, throw it on the ground, and it will grow. So yeah, Purple Heart, and it's going to be one that you find mushy right now. Mine is complete mush, but it will come back with a vengeance. So just when you do plant Purple Heart, I like to keep it contained with some type of border because it will just keep going.
Exactly. Okay, so we did have questions about sharing plant lists, and then I think there might have been one more that I kind of lost track of. So, all right, everybody, this is your last chance. Oh, I know what it was. Vanessa, did you want to talk about a book list?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and send out when I send out the gosh, now my brain is toast. I'm thinking about plants now, not about books. Also not a book list of books that the library has on garden design, and some of them are specifically for Texas. So I'll send out that list with the resources that Melissa shared here, as well as a recording, and that will be in a couple of days, probably. I guess probably on Wednesday. It takes a little bit while for the video to render and everything, so it'll probably be Wednesday before we get that out.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for doing that, Vanessa. And let's just pop in one last question here. So we had a question about hugelkultur for vegetable gardens. In just a moment, I'll let Melissa answer, but I will tell you that in our raised bed session we had with Jeff Raska, he talked of it's on the Dallas Public Library's YouTube channel on their page there. He talked about hugelkultur specifically for growing. And he did have some recommendations about modifying hugelkultur and actually laying branches down on the bottom of your, like when you build a new raised bed, lay branches down on the bottom, but he said don't get them too big. You want branches that still have like little stems and leaves on them. Lay those on the bottom, then add your soil on top, and then you can do a modified hugelkultur, and that seems to work really well. So Melissa, do you have experience with hugelkultur?
I do not, but I have some beautiful oak branches and some other material that I think I'm going to start one this year. It's a great opportunity. I'm trying to, make lemonade out of my lemons, and I've been wanting to try it, and I have materials to start with, and I do think you need to modify it because it wasn't originally meant for our area. So I think that modification is a really good hint there, because if you use the big logs, it takes a lot longer to break down. So I think using those, especially like in the metal beds that I have, it's really expensive to fill them all the way up with nice organic soil. So I think it's a great way to be cost effective and create your own soil over time.
Absolutely. I think that's a good way. And he had explained it, and I didn't realize this about, if you think about big trunks, they don't have any leaves on them, so they don't have as many nutrients in that part of the wood than you do with the branches that have leaves on them, because they're transferring those nutrients through the branches. So that's why he was saying using smaller branches in the bottom of your raised beds, and then that way you could get all that goodness in there. So just like you were talking about making your lemons, you're making lemonade out of your lemons, and doing some of that in situ composting into your raised beds. All right, so I want to thank you, Melissa, so much for being with us today. I learned a lot, and I can't wait to get these resources. And I want to thank the Dallas Public Library for hosting this program. And I want to thank all of you for spending your hour with us today, and be on the lookout for that email coming in a couple days and a link to this recording so you have it as a reference and you can enjoy it on your own time. And next Monday, 1 week from today, our session will be featuring Dr. Joe Masabni from Texas A&M AgriLife, and he's going to be talking about different exotic greens, how to grow those, and also how to use more of the plant. So some of the plants you might not think of that may you eat the root of, such as like a beet, but also the leaves are edible too. So he's going to be showing us how to get the most out of our garden plants for this spring. So once again, everybody, thank you so much, and please take care.
Thank you.